go ahead and, so our next speaker is Secretary Mike Naig. Unfortunately, Secretary Mike Naig got pulled away today, but he is providing us with a short video. So we'll do that, and then Dr. Kaisand is here to give the talk focusing on the political landscape of agriculture. So just a brief introduction of Secretary Mike Naig before we start his video. Mike Naig grew up on a family farm in northwest Iowa near Cylinder, Iowa, and continues to be involved in that operation today. He previously served as the Deputy Secretary of the Iowa Agriculture in November of 2018 and re-elected in 2020, he previously served as the Deputy Secretary of Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. And currently as Secretary, he is committed to lead efforts to expand economic opportunities for Iowans and is an advocate on behalf of the hardworking men and women who keep us fed and fueled. Attracting and retaining talent in Iowa agriculture is a reoccurring topic during his 99 county visits, and Mike believes we need to continue to engage young people and encourage them to pursue rewarding careers in agriculture. As the Secretary of Agriculture, he is focused on the following commitments: expanding markets and trade. Mike is supportive of the policies that will open new markets for the farmers of Iowa and is dedicated to expanding opportunities for livestock producers, agribusiness, and crop farmers. In addition, he's focused on water quality and land stewardship, as well as promoting careers in agriculture. And with that, we'll go ahead and start the video.
Hi, I'm Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig, and wish that I could join you in person today, but I know that you're enjoying a great program. Iowa Swine Day is a highly regarded annual conference because it is producer-driven and focused on the relevant issues and topics of the day. And there's no shortage of forces impacting the pork industry right now. I know the last few years have not been easy. In fact, to describe the difficulties, we've had to use words like historic and unprecedented to capture the intensity and the impact. We've encountered policy headwinds such as Prop 12 and Question 3. We've faced persistent disease pressures and threats, all while feeling the impacts and higher material costs, capital costs, and the full weight of inflation. But I also know that this is a strong industry full of exceptional and resilient people who will get through this. We would not be the national leader and a pork production powerhouse without the hardworking men and women who wake up every day and do what they do best, responsibly raising delicious and nutritious high-quality pork for consumers here and around the world. It's now been more than a year since the Supreme Court dropped the Prop 12 decision on us. It's been a headache for us as producers, but we always knew that the biggest losers in this decision would be consumers. A recent study from the University of California really puts a finer point on this. Within the state of California, consumer bacon prices are up 16%, pork ribs up 17%, fresh ham is up 20%, and pork loin is up a whopping 41%. You hate to say we told you so, but we've warned that this would be the result. These types of concepts always hurt those who can least afford it. Lower income consumers are penalized at a time when inflation is already running hot. And as bad as all of that is, perhaps the most dangerous impact from Proposition 12 is that it has opened Pandora's box. Without a federal fix, it is simply a matter of time before a patchwork of state-by-state regulations takes hold, with the potential to change with every election. And this will not just affect agriculture, but this will become an issue that impacts numerous industries. We need Congress to reestablish robust interstate commerce protections while also protecting states' rights. Fortunately, the new House Farm Bill includes language that would fix this. It passed with a bipartisan vote out of committee in late May. But we need the Senate to move forward. So far, they've shown very little interest. Ultimately, it may take the upcoming election to sort things out. And even as we're fighting for market access domestically, we're also building markets with great international trading partners. We need to keep expanding trade in ways that benefit all sectors of the U.S. economy. But this administration has had a total lack of ambition on that front. States like Iowa are having to help pick up the slack. Expanding markets is a big part of my work as secretary. I meet with delegations in Iowa throughout the year. I've led trade missions in the last 2 years to Mexico, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. I'll be heading to India in September and Taiwan and Japan later in the fall. Trade promotion and market development should never take a back seat. We also must remain ready for foreign animal disease threats. We're in the middle of a real challenge with high-path avian influenza as it affects both poultry and dairy, but we need to be ready for African swine fever. We must keep constant focus on keeping that devastating disease out of this country. Our state veterinarian and our animal industries team have been working continually to train samplers, recruit veterinarians, enhance biosecurity recommendations, and much more. I want to thank Iowa Pork for their ongoing commitment to partnering with us, from advocating to finishing the ISU Veterinary Diagnostic Lab to investing in foreign animal disease response equipment. We have a good industry partner. Our approach is exactly the kind of public-private partnership that we need to continue moving us in the right direction. I've also been working through my association, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, to keep the focus on vaccine development. We should be supportive of all avenues. Innovation is always important. We must have the tools available so we can be ready to deploy if the need arises. Shutting the door on certain platforms like mRNA would be a mistake, especially if it holds promise. All of this is why we need a new farm bill that continues to help provide resources for preparedness and response. And finally, we must continue to accelerate our water quality and soil conservation efforts. We must do more. More cover crops, more bioreactors, more saturated buffers, more wetlands. We're setting records for conservation adoption, but we must keep pushing the limits year after year. I want to thank all of the pork producers who are participating in our Iowa Pig Farmer Batch and Build project to get more bioreactors and saturated buffers installed. No matter where you are in Iowa, we need you engaged on this. I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you all to think about how you can take your own conservation and water quality efforts to the next level. Thank you for attending Iowa Swine Day today. I hope you can head home with new connections and new ideas. Going forward, we know that we have much work to do, but as an industry, we shouldn't shy away. We should be proud of what we do. We should keep on the offensive and not a defensive posture. As pork producers, what you do matters to consumers and to our communities. At times like these, and frankly any time, it's critically important that this industry speak with a strong, clear voice on the issues that matter. We must keep this industry strong, growing, and moving forward. Many thanks to each of you for all that you do to contribute to the success of Iowa's pork industry and Iowa agriculture as a whole. Enjoy the rest of Iowa Swine Day.
Thank you, Secretary Naig. With that, we'll continue on. We have Dr. Jeff Kaisand, who's also with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. Dr. Jeff Kaisand serves as the State Veterinarian and Division Director for the Animal Industry Division within the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. He joined the department in 2013 and served as the Assistant State Veterinarian for 6 years before he was appointed as the State Veterinarian. Dr. Kaisand works with the federal, state, and industry partners to protect the health of Iowa's livestock industry and develop foreign animal disease response plans. Dr. Kaisand earned his bachelor's degree in animal science at Iowa State, as well as graduated from the Iowa State College of Veterinary Medicine. With that, we want to welcome you to the stage.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Apologize, I'm not Secretary Naig, but as he mentioned, he sends his regards. I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to give you some background on what we're doing. Mike mentioned we spend a lot of time on foreign animal disease preparedness. And I'm going to talk about high-path avian influenza, how it's affecting poultry producers and dairy producers. And you might start to say, why are you talking about that in front of swine producers? And I hope as we go along, you're going to pick up some of those pieces as why I'm doing that. This slide, actually developed this slide, the example post-2015. So in disease outbreak, and actually it happens in our daily occurrence when we're working on issues, but actually the secretary told me to stop calling it this. I call it the triangle of triumph or triangle of turmoil. He said to call it the triangle of cooperation. But it's got state, federal, and industry on each of the sides. Now, I agree, sometimes the sides aren't all the same, but we all have to work together for a lot of the issues we deal with. And when we talk about foreign animal diseases, one of the things we talk about a lot is we can't eliminate industry while eliminating the disease, but we can't let the disease eliminate the industry. And that's what's a lot of times very difficult when we're talking with individual producers with infected farms, and we may be depopulating poultry farms, and what that means for that individual farm, but also what it means for the higher level impact on the state of Iowa. Before I go on, I want to mention here, and I said we've talked about this for a long time, the importance of this triangle. But the high path situation right now within the poultry and dairy industry brings a lot of this, well, it sort of brings it together, but it also creates a lot of challenges. And typically you'd think each side of the triangle was on the same page, and the issues were between the sides of the triangles. But what we're faced with today with high path and the same virus circulating within the poultry sites, well, there was a point source introduction, it appears, in a dairy in Texas, changed a little bit, affects dairy cows but doesn't kill them. And that was spread by the movement of cattle to numerous other states in the United States. And when it was moved, especially when it moved to Michigan, it was documented the same virus moved from dairies into poultry sites. And so our approach in poultry sites is completely depopulating the poultry site as quickly as possible. The approach for dairy with the same virus is not depopulation. So the high path situation between poultry and dairy has created issues. We have 2 species in the barnyard with the same virus that we're treating very differently. The other layer that it adds a level of complexity to is at the federal level, well, on the state level as well, but at the federal level because of the zoonotic component. And if any of you followed when it first outbreak occurred in Texas, there was a human case, a worker on a dairy farm that contracted high path avian influenza. When it moved to Michigan, there were several workers, and if you're following, just recently Colorado has had a huge uptick in both dairy farms and poultry farms in the spillover into poultry. And there's been, I don't know, I think we're up to 10 or 12 workers now. So we also have the zoonotic component to it. And on the federal side, what that has created issues with, issues, complexity is you have the CDC involved with this. And the CDC is quite concerned about the human cases and how we're controlling this disease and wanting to be very involved. So there's a lot of discussions between CDC and the White House, and then those discussions then to USDA on the approach, because usually, especially in the state of Iowa, we have code authority regulations over foreign animal diseases. So we have the authority to quarantine, depopulate sites, so that falls under the Department of Agriculture. So in this triangle, there's even on each side, and on the producer side, as I've already mentioned, you've got 2 species in the barnyard that we're treating entirely different. And I can't tell you how challenging it is to face a poultry producer that either has 50,000 or 100,000 birds on a site, tell them we're going to depopulate, or look at a poultry producer that has 1, 2, 3, 4 million birds and we're going to depopulate them, and have to answer the question to them, why aren't you depopulating the dairy down the road from me that has the same virus? And it's also hard to say to a dairy producer, we're going to depopulate your farm for a virus that's not causing major economic issues. It does cause issues, decreased milk production. Some of the dairies do experience, if the cows get sick, they go down, they get weak, and they may have to be euthanized so they can't get back up. But it's a new twist to this that we use all the time, and part of the reason I'm saying it, so as we go through this, we're all asking the question and thinking about what's the next species this could move into. And as swine, and Mike said, the importance that we put in the state of Iowa on foreign animal disease preparedness and the spread of even other diseases through the state infecting different producers, the importance that we have here in the Iowa, especially the swine industry. And if swine were to become infected with this virus, it's a concern. And I hope as we go through this, you're thinking about this too, as you become one of those species in the barnyard that could become affected, and thinking from the standpoint, Maybe swine aren't affected very much with clinical signs. Could be, maybe it could change when it gets into into swine. The other issue is the zoonotic component. There's a lot of discussions right now in protecting workers on farms, so it's a huge issue. I was almost late getting here, but right now there's a meeting going on between the Iowa poultry industry and the Iowa dairy industry, and I commended them on it. I don't think anything that's ever been done before. They're sitting down and trying to have some discussions on how can they work better together, understanding where infected farms are, communication, and things that they could better work together on. They invited, cattlemen's are sitting there at the table, swine's represented at the table, so they're talking through ways they can better communicate. And the thing I said to them was, the better industry can work together and resolve the issues, the better off we all are. If we can keep the regulatory component out of it, it helps us all. So I'll give you a quick status of avian cases. So this outbreak that we're faced with right now in poultry started in 2022. The difference, we had an outbreak in 2015. The difference between now and then, there weren't many states affected in 2015. A lot of the spread in 2015 was lateral spread from farm to farm. It wasn't point source introductions, some biosecurity issues, some disease transfer from site to site. In this outbreak, just about all states have been affected, and most every case is a point source introduction from wild birds into poultry. So with this outbreak's the largest. One thing I will mention, we've had mammals affected from the very beginning in 2022. So dairy cattle it's not new, but what is different, we actually had one of the first cases in mammals in Iowa in early 2022. It was about roughly week-old possums that were in a wildlife rehabber's care in an incubator, and the possums died and were tested and were positive. But most of the differences up till now to the dairy, most of the times when mammals have become affected, they die. If you followed in Minnesota, some goat kids were affected, but they get neurologic signs and die. So a little difference in when it moved from wild birds into dairy in Texas, how it didn't change and isn't killing them, and adapted itself to survive in dairy cattle. So recent detections, so we went in Iowa from last November, the day before Thanksgiving, at a large layer site in northwest Iowa, called with clinical signs. We didn't have any until right around just before. Our large layer was Memorial Day, they called with clinical signs. We've also had 2 turkey sites. All 3 of the poultry sites in Iowa, the sequencing shows that it's the B3.13 strain, which is a strain that's circulating dairy sites. Colorado actually is experiencing several outbreaks right now, outbreaks in dairies, and it has spread again into poultry sites. And even in the last few days, the state of Colorado has issued an order for all dairies in the state of Colorado to test. No other states have done that. We actually somewhat led the way there. In early June, we ordered testing of all of the dairies in the circles around infected poultry premises. We did that, and we had a lot of questions, especially from the dairy industry. Why are you doing something different in the state of Iowa than what other states are doing? And our comments were, Iowa agriculture is a lot different than most other states. We're very concerned, we take it very seriously, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to identify disease as well as doing things to stop the spread of disease. Some other detections, Florida, Idaho, and Minnesota. Minnesota's actually gone, I don't know, I talked to the state very few days ago. They haven't had any for several days, but they've had quite a few prior to that, both poultry sites and dairy sites. So this is a site some of our staff like to look at several years ago. Birdcast, you can go on and look at the prior days movements of migratory birds. So people like to look at how many birds are migrating through. I already mentioned the commercial sites that we had went from last November to the last 3 in Iowa, were a poultry site, Sioux 2, then Cherokee 4 and Sac 4 were both turkey sites. But you can see, and when I made the comment a minute ago, when you look at a poultry producer and say, they have to depopulate 4.2 million birds versus the dairy down the road that they're not depopulating. It becomes difficult. So current status of livestock, I mentioned Colorado actually has had a big increase here lately. Idaho, we have 13 cases in Iowa. When we issued those orders to test around control areas, I think probably it looked like coincidentally the outbreak was occurring, because when we did those orders to test, we found 10 premises in the circle around infected poultry premise. We only issued the orders around infected poultry premises. When we found a dairy premise, we did not issue orders around those sites. But we found 10, so we had 3 other sites. We have 13 infected dairy premises in Iowa right now. 3 of those were self-reporting, they had clinical signs, but 10 of them we found in the control zone testing. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in those control zones, we issued 29 orders to test. An order is very similar to a quarantine. So when we draw a circle around an infected poultry premise, we issue quarantines to all the poultry premises in that circle. They're required to do surveillance testing, and they're required to get permits to move. With the dairy order, we did not quarantine their dairies. All we did is issue them an order to test. So that order is a legal document similar to quarantine. Both of the documents have the process. You can appeal it, but we put in there that they had to test dairy herds. So in the 29 orders issued, 19 sites stayed negative throughout the testing period, and that was, as long as the control area was in place, the order was in place to test. So once the control area was released, they were no longer obligated to test. We did find 10 positive. The herd size, the dairy herd size ranged from 45 up to 10,000. We do have currently in place an exhibition order. We also wanted to make, because of what we were finding in the control area testing, we wanted to do what we could to make sure, first off, we felt that we wanted to allow exhibitions to continue on in Iowa, but we also wanted to make sure they were going to happen in a manner that was safe and we weren't spreading this virus. Because we've actually, even since then, a lot of questions. A lot of you are familiar with county fairs. You've got buildings right next to each other. Poultry are housed very close to dairies, so the questions were housing. But so we issued an order to test. The order to test in the control area around infected poultry premises, the dairy producers had to take a bulk tank milk sample that was representative of the milking of all the cows in the herd. And they also had to test sick cows. So in case the sick cows weren't contributing to the bulk tank sample, we were getting a test of those. The exhibition order mirrors that, except it also requires the lactating dairy cows going to the exhibition to have individual tests there. So far, we've had over 270 submissions for testing, 1,200 individual tests. So one of the things we did early on, before we had any cases in Iowa, we have our required reportable list of diseases, and in that list, it only required poultry to report high-path avian influenza. So we changed our reporting that it's in all livestock species. So if it were to occur in swine, everybody's required to report that it occurs in swine. So we changed that. A couple of other things we did, we put together, and as Mike mentioned, we're very appreciative of all the industry support in Iowa, what we get from each of those groups, especially Iowa Pork. I'm not saying that because I'm speaking in front of pork producers. We do value that. But we put together a working group that was comprised of dairy producer, poultry producer, dairy practitioner, USDA ARS, the research branch here, several other research, USDA staff, the head of the Nolan Labs. We have people on there. Roger Main with the diagnostic lab, Drew Magstad. Drew was the one of the two people that first identified this virus in milk, but put together a working group to start discussing how we can address this issue in Iowa, and it's been a lot of help there. We also put together a research group, and that's one of the things that we're very proud of. Out of that, in the last few days, USDA's come back, and we're the pilot state. They're awarding some research money that's non-competitive money. ISU put together several research proposals to look at dairy farms, what happens on a dairy farm, how does the virus move through, new animals introducing in, because a lot of the questions people have said, Just like the swine industry, do we stop movements into a farm and keep adding animals in, much like PERS approach strategy? But looking at that, so USDA is going to award a large 7 figures if all of those projects are awarded 7 figures in dollars there. So one of the things we did with dairy producers is when they'd have, even though we weren't quarantining them, we would have a call with them and we would go through what the USDA order was. In April, the USDA put out an order that you couldn't move lactating dairy cows across state lines without testing them. And now the hole in that, or the gap is you could still move other animals off of those farms. So back to the difficulty again of issuing quarantines and strict not moving animals off of a farm. I will throw in here now, and there's been even discussions at the national level with swine. What happens if it happens into a swine farm? Do we allow movements off of a swine farm or not? Do we quarantine them or not? And there's also a corollary I didn't mention here that I hope everybody's thinking about. The planning we do for foreign animal diseases every day, there's a huge corollary right here with FMD. What happens if we have an FMD outbreak in the United States, in the state of Iowa? We have multiple species in the barnyard affected. Now you could, and probably clinical signs, how it affects the species is somewhat similar. Have multiple species. We move beyond a stamping out and eradicating phase. We're in a phase where we don't have vaccine available to vaccinate farms, start decreasing the amount of virus shed in the farms. But what do we do with those infected farms? Do we allow them to move? So if you're a producer that has a farm that doesn't have FMD, and do we allow another producer to move animals from a farm infected with FMD to be placed next to your farm? So there's a lot of corollaries. Hopefully we're all watching and paying attention, but corollaries there. So we'd have these calls with with dairy producers, and we'd go over the federal order with them. USDA would cover that. There's financial assistance. USDA has put out kind of that blend between not being a hard hand regulatory-wise, stopping all movements, but putting some financial assistance programs available, as well as putting hopefully some things in that. They tied some things to that financial assistance, either testing, allowing things to happen on the farm, but USDA would cover that. One of the things, and whether it's a poultry facility or a dairy facility, public health asks if they can have a list of the farm workers on your farm so they can monitor those workers for the zoonotic component or if they get sick. It's not mandatory, but they ask if they can. A lot of discussions right now within OSHA of what those requirements are for workers on farms with these zoonotic issues. Then we would cover, from the IDAL standpoint, of we're not issuing a quarantine to your farm, but stressing the importance to them of how different they are from an infected poultry premise. From depopulation to not depopulating, what do they do with waste milk? Does that go down the drain? Does it go out to a lagoon where birds could be further infected with it? Dead trucks going from site to site, feed trucks, bulk tank milk trucks, all of those biosecurity things we think about. And we would ask them, USDA allowed us, we asked for an EPI team to come into the state of Iowa and start doing EPI on this to try and figure out how it was spreading into dairy farms, how it was spreading from dairy farms to poultry farms, and the question, is it going from poultry farms back to dairy? We'd also ask them, I mentioned the research, that was early on when we were having the discussions of research, looking at these farms, back to that question of how does it spread, not only get to a farm, but spread within a farm, are all, even way back to PERS, and when we first started talking about PERS, does it go through the whole sow farm at once? Subpopulations, the early work Scott D did with subpopulation, does that happen on a dairy farm? If we're adding in lactating dairy cows on a dairy farm, does that keep it going? Replacements back in. So it looks, with some of those research projects, there's going to be a lot of that work done to try and better understand that. Bulk tank sample testing, that's a new concept. It's probably a similar concept to the swine industry talking about oral fluid testing for quite a few years, using oral fluids in a foreign animal disease outbreak. But what we were doing in our order, we required PCR testing to look for the actual virus circulating in the bulk tank, and we also did what's called an NP ELISA test. It's a general screening ELISA test for influenza A, but we wanted to know if we found one, what the status was. Had the farm been infected prior, has antibodies in the milk, or is it just purely a new infection? The one thing I want to mention here, and actually, and sometimes I have Captain Obvious moments that I should have had a long time ago, when the group was talking about the poultry and dairy, we today have cases of spillover of swine influenza into turkey sites. What happens is if we have turkey sites near swine sites, what happens is a lot of times either H1 or H3 can infect turkeys. So what happens and how we find it is turkeys have to test before they move to slaughter because of the NPIP program. You're familiar with the SHIP program trying to mirror. It's not to a place where you're testing swine before they move. But we test, and when they test and they have an antibody positive result, we stop the movement of those poultry until we figure out what's going on with that antibody test. Sometimes it's they also can do a PCR test, but if it's positive, we stop the movement until we figure out what that is, because what our concern is, whether it's an H5 or H7, that's generally low path strains are either H5 or H7 in poultry, low or high path. So we stop, and we do find occasionally, we haven't had probably for a month or two right now, but we do see them several times a year, and what ends up being identified in is an H1 or H3 in the turkey side. And once we figure that out, we allow them to move. But the point is, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that a virus moves from swine to poultry. The other thing is some of the research that's already been done shows that this high path can infect pigs, and it'll show minimal clinical signs, and for a brief period of time they are shedding. So that's why I wanted to wrap it back together, why I spent the time talking about what's going on, because if swine do become involved, become a species in the barnyard that's affected, what happens with swine, the zoonotic component is a real piece of this as well. So some of the other things we're doing, we actually had a call this morning. Today's a pretty busy day. We have a swine subcommittee that several years ago, if you heard, we worked on permit requirements for ASF. We weren't moving forward with specific requirements for moving animals during an ASF outbreak. This subcommittee worked on a lot of those details, moved through U.S. Animal Health through the Swine Committee. You can go find those permit requirements today on the USDA website. What we're currently working through now and have spent the past several months, what happens to a buying station? What are the permit requirements if a buying station is found, gets caught up in a control area and it's usually a quarantine? What are the testing requirements? And so actually what I thought we were going to get through more quickly today, we actually was good discussion on how do you test a buying station? So example, a finisher moving to harvest to a swine packer, to a packer facility, they have to hold a pre-movement isolation period for 3 days. Nothing moves on or off the farm except essential movements. You test 3 days and 1 day before the movement. If those tests are negative, then you can move the pigs from a finisher to a packer. The question, how do we test, make sure that we're not moving pigs at a buying station, and how do we test them to make sure that they're not, because they're kind of in between. Harvest facilities, they don't keep pigs in the lairage pens probably for more than overnight, and they clean them out. It's a regular flow. Buying stations could have pigs there for several days, 3 days, an incubation period, so we want to make sure. So we're spending a lot of time on that. We're also participating here in Iowa in a tabletop exercise with the National Veterinary Stockpile. That's where we're working with them. We have a plan, but working through and exercising that plan of how they would deploy their resources from the National Veterinary Stockpile. We've also agreed at a national level, and actually we were chosen, there was 3 states chosen to participate in a nationwide, much similar, if you remember, in 2019, they called it the Sphere exercise. There was a nationwide ASF tabletop exercise that was a week-long exercise. This is going to be very similar. We were chosen along with the state of Nebraska and the state of Kansas. So a lot of things that we're going to talk about there is Vaccine allocation, if we have an FMD outbreak, we have to immediately request from USDA how many doses of vaccine we want. And that will be allocated because the initial vaccine allotments will be limited. There's also, USDA has a policy right now, they want states to take possession, state animal health officials to take possession of that vaccine. We've worked and done a proof of concept. We would rather them hand that vaccine over to distributors, let it go through the normal route that you get stuff from every day, either directly from a distributor or through a veterinarian. So we're going to try and make sure that's exercised through that. If you're aware of African Swine Fever Forum, and I believe it was 2019 or 2020 was the first forum. It was a forum between Canada, United States, and Mexico, starting to talk about those issues of what happens if one of the states and countries in North America gets ASF, how will we work together between those countries? So there was one in Canada, one in Mexico, United States hosted it last year. The next one's moving back to Canada, and that will be this September. So for the pillars they're working on, discussion that the 3 days will be based on is preparedness planning, enhanced biosecurity, ensuring business continuity, coordinated risk communication. So there's several speakers from the United States. We're going to be speaking with the continuity business and a lot of the permitting. We've been doing the work on permitting. Give you a quick update on our equipment, depopulation equipment in Iowa. We have purchased 2 end dump trailers. You can see the picture up in the upper right hand. Our intent is retrofitting them. We're currently in the process of trying to find a welding shop, a fabricator. We're going to take these end dump trailers. We've got to modify the back door to put a sliding door in it so we can load animals in. We're going to design the top to where we can hopefully hook foam heads on the top so these and ports on the side to pump in CO2. So these trailers can be used dual purpose, foaming, load pigs into the trailers, foam them, or load pigs in and use CO2. One of the issues right now, and it appears, not for sure, AVMA is updating their depopulation guidelines, so we're hopeful that they will be adding in foam in those guidelines. So I'll end, not sure where my time is, if I'm going to end earlier. Some key reminders I always want to make sure, because we have some of these discussions on farm animal disease planning, everybody gets that I can't do anything on my farm. It's all the higher level, I don't have any control. You actually do have an extreme amount of control on your farm for foreign animal disease preparedness. One of the things is help us make sure your premise has an ID and you keep it up to date. An example, and the swine industry is great about this. Most all of your premises have prem IDs. When I mentioned that we draw circles around infected poultry premises, because of 2015 and we're already at an outbreak, most of the poultry premises have prem IDs. Dairy producers don't. So when we drew those circles, it took us a fair amount of time to figure out where all the dairy premises were in the circles. And we did that by either going to our database, licensing database of dairies, figuring out what was in the circle, DNR, any other sources we could get to try and identify. Because one of the things that we did in 2015, we drove the circles. 3 weeks into that outbreak, when we had 50 people in a room in Sioux Center, I called back to Des Moines and said, we're going in circles when we're driving these circles. So we stopped doing that. So it's tremendously helpful, and why I mentioned prem IDs is critically important. Biosecurity, keep disease off your farm. Whether you want to look back to the example of PED in the swine industry, if you remember, producers that got PED were dramatically devastated by the losses on their farm. But producers that kept PED off and the increase in the market, the dollars, producers that kept PED off their farms did very well because they had pigs to sell at a higher profit or because of the prices. So, and we also a lot of times talk about foreign animal diseases, keeping it in a foreign country, checking it at the border, but the last place a foreign animal disease has to get into is an animal in the United States. So keeping biosecurity on your farm vigilant, keeping any animals on your farm become infected is critical. Record any clinical signs, be prepared to collect samples. Example, I'll quickly mention, Certified sampler program in the swine industry, tremendously beneficial program. Complements to the swine industry. Poultry industry doesn't have that. We still allow, you know, it's mostly under the direction of veterinarian, but farm workers, people on the farm are collecting those samples now. And you could say, on one argument, we're allowing samples to be collected by people that aren't necessarily formally trained, and then we depopulate 4 million birds on those samples collected. But I can assure you we're beyond, there is a high level of assurance those samples are being collected properly, and there's checks and balances. We don't depopulate farms solely on that sample collection. But the dairy industry, one of the things we did when we issued the order to test, we required in the order that those samples had to be collected by accredited veterinarians. And if they didn't collect them, it had to be under their direct supervision. So if they allowed the dairy producer to collect those samples, they could, but it was under the responsibility of that accredited veterinarian. And why we did that, we recognize in a foreign animal disease outbreak the need and support we're going to have from accredited veterinarians, because we can't do everything, whether it's vaccine distribution, collecting samples, but we need the help of accredited veterinarians working with producers. Biocontainment, we continue to make sure producers are prepared. If you become an infected premise, be prepared of those. And we have on our website a lot of guidance documents to help you through that. I took this picture in the DR. I spent 3 weeks in the DR. It was 2022 with USDA and trying to understand ASF a little bit better. But on one day we went out, I took a picture of this boat sinking. So it's not all lost. Could put the plug back in the boat and get it back going, or it's a sinking ship. You determine how your destiny on your farms and making sure you're prepared.
Thank you, Dr. Kaisand. We can turn the lights up in the house for a moment and see if there's a question. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before lunch. Oh, one over here? Oh yeah, right there in the front. Is Dr. Kaisand's mic on? Try again.
So we don't have any direct information of that. One of the things we did very similar, I don't think I mentioned, Michigan requested an epi team to come in from the USDA, so they sat down, started going through with producers the epi information on and off of their farms. And one of the things they found in that epi information was there was workers that worked on poultry farms part of the week, and those same workers would work on dairy farms another part of the week. So there was direct connections of farm workers and the sequencing of the virus. But I'm not aware of anybody yet that's either trying to collect air around premises to see, but there is, I mean, there's epi work doing, but I don't know. So it could be aerosolized, but we don't have any direct evidence of that. What I was starting to say is, with ASF, when we draw a control zone around an infected poultry premise, it'll only be a 5-kilometer circle, because it's not known that ASF is spread aerosolized. We draw a 10-kilometer circle around a poultry premise because of the concern that it could be aerosolized. Hard to prove that.
One more question.
Is this working?
Yes, that's working. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kaisand, for the presentation. So my question is, I saw that you present something about specifically planned for exhibitions. As we know, the Iowa State's coming up. Can you expand a little bit about what your plan for before the exhibition, and maybe any plan if something comes up during the exhibition?
So you're asking about the exhibition testing?
For Iowa State Fair.
Yes.
Sure, sure. So we worked with the state fair before, well, so everybody knows too, and Mike, and we don't do anything without thinking through it deliberately and talking to the industries. So before we issued the order to test around control zones, we discussed that with industry. We also discussed and worked with the Iowa State Fair and talked about the exhibition order. So the exhibition order mirrors the control zone testing, bulk tank, sick cows, but then you have to test the individual lactating cows going to the exhibition. So our intent is making sure that animals coming to the exhibition, and there's always a gap in there when you test and they still could be either in incubation or test positive, that don't test positive but they're positive. But our intent was to make sure that animals coming to the exhibitions were safe. So testing beforehand. I'm pretty sure the Iowa State Fair's put out, they're not going to use their milking parlor because that's one of the questions. This virus is found in very high levels in the milk, CTs of even in the teens for weeks. Not probably teens and for weeks, but you can find the virus for weeks in the milk. So they're not going to use the common milking parlor. We put in our order and said that if you're going to an exhibition, you have to take your own milking equipment. Or if the exhibition had parlors, you had to do it by exhibitor through the parlor and clean and disinfect in between. So we tried to put in some safeguards. And talk to State Fair. They're working on a process to get rid of milk, even though we're testing ahead of time. But I mentioned milk disposal. If producers are dumping it down the drain lagoons, we want to make sure State Fair is going through some of those exercises. I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. One more question right here, and then we'll break for lunch.
Yes, thanks for your time, Dr. Kaisand. Specific to the foam, could you elaborate on the use of foam? I think you mentioned the euthanizing.
Sure. And I guess if any of you have seen it, Ohio State's done some work with foaming of large animals. You know, in 2015, so the way we depopulate poultry in Iowa, we can use foam, a lot of times floor birds, or where you can foam them. The vast majority of all the sites in Iowa, we do VSD plus, ventilation shutdown plus. But for large animals, swine, we're working on. But Ohio State's done a lot of work in foaming. Like, it wasn't first believe you could because the animals, but it does work. They've done some studies. It is an effective way to do it. The reason I mentioned AVMA, we could do it alone. But what happens is when we have a poultry site and we want to use VSD plus, the poultry producer has to sign a form. I sign as the state animal official. That goes up to USDA, and they either approve or disapprove the use of VSD plus because it could be tied to indemnity. They say you can do that. Their support from that is VSD plus is listed in the mass depopulation guidelines from AVMA. And that's why I mentioned, as of today, foaming of swine, cattle is not listed in the mass depopulation guidelines from AVMA. Hopeful that's going to change, but USDA uses the support of the AVMA depopulation guidelines and what they allow or don't allow.
Thank you. Let's again thank Dr. Kaisand for his time today.
Thank you. Thank you.